people like Al Shanker, who was head of the teachers union, which is in large urban areas, largely African. And so we began to find AFT putting out anti-African arguments against the infusion of African content in school curriculum. Some of the bitterest papers came out of that area. And here we find that Shanker himself is a part of the Educational Excellence Network, and Dennis Doyle, who is based in Indianapolis. Let's look at the Hudson Institute, founded in 1961. It's an old one. For many years, Hudson focused on national security, international affairs. It now also has a strong emphasis on domestic issues, including education. And in Hudson is Chester Finn. We just heard about him over here in the other foundation. And who else? Bill Bennett, who we just heard about from the Heritage Foundation, who used to be Secretary of Education. Remember what I said, it's one small family of people that give the impression of being hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. It's just a set of interlocking networks. And then just a couple more, the Bradley Foundation. Its president is Michael Joyce. He heads the Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation out of Milwaukee. Considered the ideological leader of the conservative foundations. In 1994, it had assets of $389 million, and it approved roughly $23 million in grants. So they're living off the interest of these hundreds of millions, and off the interest of the hundreds of millions, able to fund their anti-African propaganda efforts. The John M. Olin Foundation, which also contributed to, remember, Bradley and Olin contributed to Heritage, founded in 1953 by John Olin of the Olin Corporation, a chemical and industrial company. This foundation, based in New York City, had assets of $122 million in '95, and it made grants of $16 million in 1995 in that year. And then, of course, there's the Scafee Foundation, there's other foundations. This is not, by any means, an exhaustive list of the foundation. Now, here's one of my challenges. One of my challenges is that, see, one of the things that you could do, what they've tried to do with their strategy, is to tie down the African scholar. See, if they take some little poot-butt scholar, comes up with a jumped-up book, and then all the African scholars go over there to try to chase this one person, then when we get there and beat them up, then there's somebody else that will be sent out. Another pit bull will be sent out. In the meantime, you can't do your reading, you can't do your writing. The very thing that caused them to create their attacks in the first place, will be diminished. That is the production of the scholarship that tells the truth about African people. It is the falsehood that causes us to be divided against ourselves. And it is because of the systematic attention to propaganda that we have been able to be injured as we have. And so one of the things that I want to say is that there's a lot of people in ASCAC always want to know, what can I do? And some will do the same kind of things you've seen the scholars do. You become scholars and do that, but there's other work to be done that's also scholarly. For example, I just gave you the skeleton of the names of a set of foundations. I can see a whole board as big as that wall with all these foundations on it, with the board of directors on it, with the names of the people who are the writers, with the publications that they've done, with the lines that tie them together. Why? So that our people can understand the nature of the battle that we're in. We don't understand that because we don't have the big picture. And we think it's some little poot-butt person over here in the corner that's coming up. Like Howe is a poot-butt. He's from Oxford. But that's part of the strategy too. See, the strategy started out about 15 years ago. Most of the attacks on African scholarship came from the newspaper editorial, magazine editorial, talk show host. That's usually the first line of attack. Think of it as a well-organized army. The Army sends out the Marines first, but they got all this Navy. They got all this Army laid back and wait. They're not ready to commit those forces yet. It's the same thing where we're going here. The first thing we saw were all these poot-butt editorials. John Leo in a magazine. Somebody fed him information. And then he comes out and says, in fact, John Leo came to the Infusion Conference that Obadella and Lucretia Payton and I organized some years ago here in Atlanta. And in the second year, we had 2,000 people here. We had Theophil Obinga here as the keynote speaker. And John Leo was sitting in the audience. I didn't even know he was sitting in the audience, but came back and wrote this article, but he couldn't say what Obinga said. That was the place where Obinga delivered the lecture, The African Origin of Philosophy. Now you go back and read the lecture and see if the lecture matches the editorial. See, all Leo could say was Obinga trashed the Greeks. He didn't trash the Greeks. All he said was, this is what Africans did. And they did it before the Greeks, and the Greeks came and learned from the Africans. So if the Greeks were trashed, the Greeks trashed themselves. It's very simple. He didn't trash the Greek, but he did not give this powerful argument that Obinga had given right there at the conference. So that's kind of the first line of attack on the African family, to send out the put-but troops, those people who don't have background, but who are in a position to make noise. The second thing they did was to identify scholars who had a reputation, but not in the fields that they were criticizing. Remember a guy who used to be a historian, an American historian. His specialty was the history of the United States. I think his name was O'Neill from the University of Chicago. He didn't know anything about Kemet, but he's trying to criticize scholars who write about Kemet. And he's trying to use the prestige that he had earned over here in American history to comment about Kemetic history. Stupid! For anybody who knows anything about it. Then, of course, they moved into using people who knew something about Egypt, like Yerko. Frank Yerko is now director of the Field Museum, or was, in Chicago. He was a student at the Oriental Institute in Chicago, where you study Egyptology. But the word on the street was that he was never going to get his degree. And so far, I don't think he ever has. But then he, as a junior person, could be run out there to do battle with the Africans. Why do you suppose they did that? Why didn't the full professors of Egyptology come out and do battle with us? Why do you think they didn't? Because in 1974, they tried that. They had all of those great professors in Cairo at the Cairo Symposium. And Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophil Obinga kicked them from one end of Cairo to the other. Get the UNESCO General History of Africa and read the minutes of the meeting of the Cairo Symposium. And it's very clear that academically, the Africans were the only ones that had anything to say. And that's what the reporter said. He said everybody who came to this conference knew that this was going to be an academic argument about the race of the ancient Egyptians, whether they're black or white people. She said, but we've been here now for several days, and only Obinga and Diop have done their homework. So there was a real lack of balance in this discussion. In other words, when they got 20 Egyptologists, only 2 Africans among them, in the same place, looking at the evidence, all the evidence of their critics fell apart. So now, do you think those same people are going to want to come back and do much debating anymore? No. The Temple University Conference, we brought them in there too. They had Brother Malefi and Brother Finch, Brother Maulana, and then they had people like Ashtor, the great Assyriologist, Mudimbe, the Negro African was there. We have videotapes of all of these confrontations, folks. And clearly, we didn't have to go home with our tails between our legs. The videotapes are overwhelming proof of the fact that we can stand our own ground when they get their best up against us. So naturally, the people in those ranks, see, because what are you going to do if you're a scholar? If you're a scholar and you have, you've been studying pottery all your life in Egypt. Maybe you're a scholar, you've been studying architecture all your life in Egypt. And then somebody comes and asks you